credit is a dollar for dollar reduction in your federal income tax. So if you, by way of an example, if your income is $200 and you're able to get a FICA Tip Credit for the payroll taxes that you pay of $100, that is a direct dollar for dollar reduction in your tax. Okay, so if your tax was $100, you would have the credit of 100, it would wipe it out. A deduction, on the other hand, if your income was 200 and you were able to take a $100 deduction for the payroll taxes, your new income is now $100. Keep math simple, let's say a 50% tax rate, you're paying tax on $50. Okay, so that's your tax. So again, the credit is much more valuable than a deduction. Historically, as we talked about, with cash being very prevalent, tips not being reported, the FICA Tip Credit was instituted to essentially have the establishment owner police the collection of tips. So I, as a restaurant owner, am going to make sure that you report your tips that you collected in cash or through now credit card, because I'm going to get a credit for it. And again, the credit being more valuable than a deduction, it was a way to kind of pass off the responsibility of making sure that these tips were collected. A very hot topic now, certainly in this industry, is, should we get rid of tips? Should we just have a salary for servers? Will that have increased prices? And what I started with, a topic that isn't necessarily discussed as much, but is very rampant in this industry, is sexual harassment. And the tipping culture, it creates, essentially it's, if I do a good job and I know that I have to do a good job, my pay is directly related to, number one, what type of mood you're in, or what type of mood I'm in. If I make a mistake and you decide not to tip me, I'm not gonna have a very good day. It creates a culture of where sex sells. And oftentimes, this industry is the first job that both women and men have, because it's very transient, very easy to get in and out of. Training consists of learning a new menu, and that is the extent of it. So what you really want to look at is this culture of tipping and how it essentially needs to be looked at and possibly rethought to affect a lot of these issues. Again, one big issue of why people aren't coming back to work in this industry, I don't think it's very simplistic to say because of unemployment insurance. And because they're on unemployment, they don't want to come back to work. Well, it's not just about that. And again, in this industry, it's not just about that. There's the vaccine issues. I don't want to put myself at risk. I may or may not make enough income due to tipping. There's childcare. So there's a lot of reasons why people may not want to come back to this industry. And if we look at salaries for servers, essentially what this would do is it would create a professional waiter. It would reduce the amount of jumping around from one to the other. It would solve some of the issues in the industry of getting a bad section. It would, there's a big difference between working at Ruth Chris as a waiter and working at Denny's as a waiter, solely because the ticket price on the bill is that much higher. You stand to earn that much more at different establishments. You may be in a bad section. Many times you could go to work, section next to you made $500, your section made nothing, or $200 or $100. Again, it creates a culture that isn't necessarily accountable to the business, because it's very easy to pick up and go. If you are getting paid the same amount, it's a lot easier to budget. There isn't this inconsistent earnings where one week you make $1,000 and the next week you only make 200. And if that 200 week earning coincides with when your rent is due, that could be a problem. So paying wages may be a way to kind of solve some of the culture. It may be a way to reduce the amount of sexual harassment that goes on in the industry. Here's a sample menu. This is actually taken from one of my favorite restaurants, which is Gramercy Tavern. And if you look on the left, you'll see if certain items were ordered, we've got sales tax, you're tipping at 20%, the total bill is $133. If the establishment was instead to increase their prices by 20%, you could look at the total bill, and without tipping, you could look at the total bill. it's about a $2 difference in total. 1.377% increase. That's all that we're talking about here. Now, psychologically, do I want to pay $19.20 for a salad? Do I want to pay $38.40 for a hamburger? That is the biggest, I think, obstacle in moving towards more of a tip included salary model, where although the bottom line looks very similar and is, in fact, I would argue, the exact same number, psychologically, how are we going to move as an industry to educate people more that if I do increase my prices, I'm not necessarily going to lose customers. And if I do increase prices, I'm not going to lose money by having to pay my staff more. Because again, I'm creating a more professional environment. I'm not creating a situation where it's very salesy. There is no upsell, whether you order an espresso or whether you order a bottle of Dom. My salary is not directly tied to what you are ordering. My salary, my compensation is not directly tied to if you had a bad day or if the cook made a mistake and I brought out the wrong dish. Instead of, I'm sorry, sir, and not getting a tip, I'm still going to get the same. So there are a lot of things that we need to, I think, look at in changing the culture. And it isn't all a woe is me and kind of the worst case scenario. So I do think that moving towards an increase in price, to me, really should be the future of the industry. From a harassment standpoint, I can't tell you how many times I've gone out, we're sitting with friends, friend turns to me and says, you know what, I think they like me. I think she likes me. No. She's being nice because, not because she likes you or he, but because their compensation is directly tied to how good of an experience you have. So in this industry, 71% of women restaurant workers have been sexually harassed at least once. For the math inclined, 7 of 10. That is a lot. That is an epidemic. That is something that needs to change significantly and change quickly in order to get more people back. And it's an issue that the industry is plagued with that I think has to change. We can see here that tip workers have much more cases, much more frequency of sexual harassment compared to somebody that's working behind a budget rent-a-car center, where that just doesn't go on. It's almost implied that it's allowed in this industry. And again, it shouldn't be. Finally, in closing, there are recent situations where, the harassment is kind of front of mind. Just last week, Mario Batali and his business partner reached a settlement that will pay at least 20 people $600,000, which is a $12 million outlay of cash. The $12 million is not deductible either, and that's minimum. So there may be more. You could see examples of DoubleTree. You could see examples in Seattle. This is an issue, obviously not simplistic, and I'm not saying that if we go to a flat fee model, if we go to a wage model, all of this will be absolved. But the notion and the idea of tipping in this industry, I think, is something that that we need to look at and we need to examine very, very closely.